Hello and welcome to week 6. So we started the session by introducing Sarah, who was sitting in for the first hour, and she was observing my teaching because we have to have a couple of observations each year. Um, and Sarah sat at the back of the class, and everybody introduced themselves and then talked about how they felt during the course, what they were enjoying about the course. I read out a couple of notices. And I also talked about the fact that, as a reminder, we've got Moodle, which is the resource for independent learning, and for you to be able to do some extra experimentations to be able to expand your personal knowledge and creativity. So the plan today, or rather the plan on Monday, was to start looking at fabrics and fibres and then to continue some work on the sketchbooks. The final handing for Unit 1 is next week, and that's the 24th of November. So that will be Unit 1 handed in. We will start Unit 2 on the 1st of December, which is the following week, and our final class for the month will be on the 15th of December. That means that we're closed for Christmas, and I'll see you back on the 5th of January. So my first question was, what fabrics are you wearing? And I asked everybody to share what fabrics they were wearing and if they knew any fibres, the fibre content of the clothing. And some said, they were wearing jeans. Jeans were being made from cotton, cotton being a natural fibre. Others talked about, that they were wearing a t-shirt or a hoodie top, and we discussed what the fibres were of that. I also asked, why does it matter? And it really matters because when you think about the clothing that you wear, so if you wear a polyester top, often you find you get quite hot in polyester because it's not very breathable. At the same time, though, it does wash really well. Other reasons, might be, when you think about your cotton jeans, depending on the quality of the cotton depends on whether they're going to shrink in the wash. And actually, when we talk about wash, it does determine how you're going to look after these. And also, you think about like natural fibers and how they're going to feel against your skin, whereas synthetic fibers, you've got to think about if you're going to iron it, you've got to be really careful because it can melt on the iron really easily. And it does help you to choose like the right piece of clothing for you. So we find now a lot of bamboo fibers are being used in socks because they're antimicrobial. So they're finding that they are better for the natural skin. And saying that, a lot of people also like polyester fleece because in this cold weather, wearing polyester fleece really keeps the heat in, but it's not great for the environment, as we know. So when we start to look at fibres are really determined by four main types. And the definition of a fibre is it would be like a thin strand, hair-like texture. And it's kind of like the building blocks, really, of a fabric. So when we look at the first three fibres, you're thinking about animal fibres. And really, wool itself is an animal fibre because it's taken from a sheep. Your plant fibres would be things like cottons and your linens, and then your man-made fibres are processed really from petroleum jelly, crude oil, and you're thinking about polyester predominantly is a synthetic or man-made fibre, and things like nylon as well. So from there, we moved on and we watched a video, and the video is about an Italian company that uses orange peels, and they process the orange peel and they turn it into clothing. And this is a sample of the clothing that they use. And they talk about cellulose, and cellulose is basically the white substance that's found. They talk about the wall of a plant, but in this case, when we think about the orange, it's kind of the white substance around the orange, and that's the bit that's processed. So the actual skin, And the pulp for the orange are then sent off to other processing centres and used for other things. The other fibres that we also want to think about are blended fibres. So blended fibres might be when you get like a cotton, when you get a jumper, and it might be 60% cotton, 40% another fibre, or like organic cotton tends to be 95% cotton, 5% elastane, and that elastane is basically a stretch. It'll be a recycled polyester or something, or a recycled plastic in that way. Other fibres that we think about are lyocell. Lyocell's made from wood pulp. And we've already talked about orange peel. And orange peel, in this instance, becomes a bioplastic. That's what they're calling it. So, like I say, it's processed and it's laid out as a sheet, and then that sheet can be used as a textile. Other textiles we might think about are uh, um, sustainable textiles or bioplastics. In this instance, can be when man-made bioplastics, uh, like with the makeup bags that are out in the lobby. They're made from a bioplastic, so the bioplastic being the crisp packets, which were ironed together um, in between greaseproof paper to become a fabric textile, and then you just process it as normal. So if we think about the basic process of fabric production, we think about it in terms of a cotton fabric, for example. Cotton coming from the natural plant, at which it's then harvested and processed into fibres. And these small fibres are spun and dyed in the yarn mill. The threads are then taken over to the manufacturing plant, and they're manufactured in a big loom. So I've got a 19th century, or it's probably an 18th century version of a loom, but today these looms will be the length of the bolt of fabric. So I demonstrated a bolt of fabric that was 10 meters. So the loom for that would be 10 meters in length. The warp threads, which are the strongest threads, they run uh, parallel to each other. So perpendicular, parallel to each other, and they are tied around the loom. They are air tied around the loom. And then the weft threads, which tend to be the softer, more fluffier threads, are woven in between each of the warp threads. And I have on the slide you can see a an image of different types of weave, and they use that because different types of weave determine how the fabric is. So a one-to-one weave tends to be a cotton weave, and then we've got various types of twill weave and other types of weave. So if you think about denim jeans. So denim jeans has a different type of weave. So for this next task, what we did was we created a basic weave pattern using a couple of sheets of paper, and that was for us to be able to replicate what a piece of fabric would look like. And this is an example of the weave pattern that we made. So if we think about it, the top of the top of the paper, that would be the cut edge of the fabric, and then all the straight strips in white would be the grain line or the warp threads. The bottom of the paper becomes the end of the roll, and the two sides become the selvage or the self finished edge in this instance. So when you buy your fabric, it looks like this. It becomes one sheet when it's in the manufacturing plant, and after it's been spun. After it's been through the weaving process, the manufacturing plant will wash it and steam it dry They'll steam it dry so that all the threads are nice and straight, and then it goes through a machine and it is folded, and it's folded onto a bolt, ready for us to buy when we go to the fabric shop. So the next thing that we did was we went into the sewing studio and we started to work on the first of our worksheets. And the first worksheet is about identifying the fabrics. So if you think about it, in this worksheet, it asks you to identify the fabrics, and we're talking about the characteristics of the fabrics. And we sort of looked at the characteristics before we went into the room because we did a word cloud and we looked at a piece of cotton and we talked about the characteristics of it. So whether it was soft, whether it was shiny, whether it was matte, the edges were frayed, whether it had any stretch in it or anything. And those are characteristics, and also how it drapes. And that's what, and then when we went into the sewing studio, we had this mystery bag of fabrics. And I said to everyone, take 6 to 8 fabrics, and I'd like you to try and identify what the fabrics are using the textile book, using the fabric designer's textile book as a guide, to be as a reference, to be able to help you, and also think about the garments that the fabrics might be used for. And then when you think about why we do this, so questions that we need to ask ourselves: why does Krissie ask us to do this? And the reason that I ask you to do this is because you have to think about the fact that you're going to make this skirt and you're going to design this skirt. And when you design this skirt, your fabric is going to come into that design. It's going to enforce that design. So you're gonna draw the silhouette or the outline of what you want your skirt to look like, and that's going to be based on what you're studying, what you've been researching, and the mood board. But then your skirt might have a little bit of drape. So, for example, it might be a gathered skirt. And in this instance, what I've done is I've gathered 6 different types of fabric here. Because I've been able to look at the gathers, it helps me to decide which fabric might be suitable for my gathered skirt. Because if you think about it, when we make this skirt and it being a gathered skirt, I'm going to want to think about the time of year, what the gathers are going to look like. Do I want it to be quite structured, like the purple fabric? So it's going to be quite structured, as if it might be for a prom dress or something. Or do I want it to be quite drapey, like the top one in the right hand corner, the green one, which is actually a cotton poplin? So that one's got quite soft gathers. So there's lots of elements to think about when you're making your skirt. And this comes into it, it's about looking at the fabrics and choosing a fabric that's going to be suitable for the project that you're going to make. Because the last thing that you want to do is to take your pattern for your skirt, or your design for your skirt, and normally you go to the fabric shop with your pattern, and the fabric shop will look at the back of the pattern, and they will tell you what fabric to use. But in this instance, once you start to design your own skirt, you then have to figure out what fabric is going to be best for the picture. So is it going to drape? How is it going to sit on the skin? Being a woman, it's going to sit over the hips, and we've got shape. We want to know that if it's a gathered skirt, that the gathers are going to sit in a suitable place, and they're going to look pleasing to the female form as well. So the second task asks you to choose 3 fabrics from your mystery bag and look at how they behave. And what we do is we're going to compare them with different types of fabric manipulation. So in the previous slide, all the fabric manipulation that I've chosen there is gathering, which is the first one. And what I did was I picked 7 different types of fabric, and I gathered them all. And then, like we talked about, I was able to look at the fabric and look at how it's draping, and look at all the different types of gather to see which one I actually liked the best. And when I gathered them, I actually gathered them so that they were really neat as well, because I'm thinking about what that's going to look like if I'd have gathered it as a skirt, because the skirt is the project that we are going to make in the long run. So all the tasks and the topics that we cover work towards the skirt that we're going to design in Unit 2. So as you can see here, I'm starting to look at the characteristics. I've picked out some of the fabrics that I felt, well, I've picked out 4 of them that I felt were quite similar, either similar in texture or that I wanted to use really to compare. And what I've also done is I've photographed them all, because I know once I stick them in my sketchbook and I close my sketchbook, it's going to get quite flat. So to keep the elements of what the fabric naturally drapes like, I took photographs. That way I'm able to document all the evidence for when I add my writing and my reflections and the process. So to help me figure out this particular fabric, which I've got in the top right hand corner, which I estimate is a cotton poplin. And I sort of looked at that and I thought, well, cotton poplins are always quite light. They're always quite drapey. They've always got a nice pattern on them, because I'm thinking that might make a nice floaty gathered skirt, and it would be perfect for the summer season. The next thing that I did was I looked at my fashion designer's textile directory, and that becomes my reference point. And I talk about this book quite a lot because I think it is going to be worth its weight in gold for you guys if you start to embrace this book. And I noticed in class, everybody sort of glanced at the book, but nobody really looked at the book. And I really think you're missing a trick by not looking at this book. So we look at the contents page. The contents page in the book gives you a list of all the fabrics that this book covers. Now, in reality, there's thousands of different fabrics, because new fabrics are being made daily. You know, people are making fabrics out of pineapple, out of wood pulp, as we talked about. They're making them out of lots of different things. Mushroom is the latest fiber that's been used to make fabrics out of, and that's really popular at the moment. So I've gone through the contents page, and I know that cotton poplin is on page 61. So here we've got a sample of the page from the textile directory. I've also put the worksheet back up as a reference point for us to think about when we're talking about characteristics as well. So the characteristics that we want to look at, this page is here. It's a great help for us. It looks at the weave of the fabric. So it's got a little screenshot of what the weave of the cotton poplin is. It also gives you some information about the fabric, how it's basically made. It looks at some characteristics, and it talks about the fact that you know it's got weaknesses. It looks at the fiber content, and all those things will help you to identify the characteristics. One good way to identify the characteristic is to look at the actual weave of the fabric. How do I look at the weave of the fabric? How can I see that? So you can see that in 2 ways. First way you can see it is by getting a magnifying glass and putting your magnifying glass on the back of the fabric, and you can see how this fabric is woven. The second way is for you to use your phone and magnify the image on your phone, and then you can see. So on this picture, I magnified the image on my phone, and I could clearly see that this is an unbalanced weave, because although it's got the warp threads, and the warp threads are at the top, and the weft threads are at the side. And although I can see the difference in the threads, I wanted to be able to cross-reference them with the picture from the textile directory. So what I did with my sample is I cut myself another square, and the square is about 8 centimeters square, and I pulled some of the threads from each direction. So I pulled some from one side and then I pulled some from the other side. And that told me that the two threads in both directions are different. So you can see at the top, they're really straight, and at the side, they're quite wavy. And what I did was I ironed this piece of fabric so that I knew all the threads would be nice and straight, and that way it would help me to be able to identify it. And also it references the sample that we made earlier, the paper weave sample. So I know the white strips, when we talk about the warp threads, I could identify the white strips as being at the top of my sample. And when you feel the warp threads, you can feel that they're quite structured and they're very straight. So when you run your fingers along, they're really straight, and that's what you'll notice. And then the weft threads, which run across the woven in and out of the warp threads, and you can see them here at the side. You can sort of see that they're quite fuzzy, and they're not straight at all. And sometimes they're quite fairy as well, and that'll because of the fibers, because they're not spun very tight. So that's how you're able to tell the difference, and that's how you're able to compare them. And why do we need to know the difference of the threads? And if we go back to the page, because if we know the difference of the threads, it tells us about the fabric, about how the fabric is going to behave. And it also gives us reasons for why the fabric behaves this way. So it says here, stiff hand, depending on the yarn size and the fiber content in the weft direction. So they're talking about in the weft direction, depending on the what the fiber is and how strong the fiber is, how thick the fiber is, and the type of yarn depends on how stiff that fabric's going to be. So I decided to do this experiment on another piece of fabric. And I thought it would be interesting to look at a piece of cotton. So I know that this is a piece of shirt cotton, but I wanted to have a look at this as well. So I cut myself a length of shirt cotton and I did the exact same thing. I gathered it up and I looked at the gathers, and I made sure that the gathers were nice and neat, because I'm thinking that if I was going to make a gathered skirt, I'd want the gathers to be quite evenly spaced, and I want to see how they're going to behave on the fabric. So as you can see with my samples, I've got all the gathers and as even as I can get them, and I've taken photographs of them as well. The second thing that I did was I cut myself another square, and I cut the square in half diagonally at a 45-degree angle. And then I made gathers on that angle because I wanted to be able to see what that fabric would behave like if I used it at a 45-degree angle. And why would we do that? Because when you use fabric, when you change the direction of a fabric, it drapes differently. So when you buy a pattern in the shop, the pattern designer, the manufacturer of the pattern will always say that you should use it straight of grain, or you should do it this way, you should do it that way. But at the end of the day, that's a guide. And what you'll find with people fashion designers, not manufacturers, but actual fashion designers, they want to think out of the box. And that's what we should be doing on a level 1 course. We should be experimenting, especially at this point now being week 6. So you've been here for a few weeks. We need to be looking deeper. We need to move from surface level research, and we need to deepen our research. We need to start asking more questions, but we have to start finding those answers for ourselves, because when we find those answers, we are resolving that problem. And also, it's going to give you the knowledge and inform your practice for when you do start experimenting with different fabrics, because when you do make your design, you might want to choose a few different fabrics, and you might have to test them in these different ways to be able to tell you if it's going to work when you make your final skirt. So I did the same thing again. I wanted to work out which was the right side and the wrong side. So I cut 2 squares and I compared them against each other. The second thing I wanted to work out was how is this fabric spun, because it looks quite unusual. I can see it's spun on a direction, and I thought, well, that's quite unusual, and it's slightly textured as well. And I noticed that some of the threads are slightly thicker. The warp threads, some of the threads are slightly thicker than the other one. So I then went back to my fashion designers textile directory, had another look through the contents page for it to give me some extra information. Oops. So when I looked at the contents page, I then started to wonder which fabric this really would be. So I had a look through all the different types of cotton weave fabrics that they have, and I came across this Dobby weaves. And what I found quite interesting was that a Dobby weave is two or more weaves in two different directions. And they do that because it means that you've got a slight texture on this one. So you can see it's woven in two different directions. And the way that I found that out was by looking at my magnifying glass, and I also took a photograph of um, the actual fabrics to look at them and to be able to see the combination of weaves with this fabric. And like I say, I'd already made my gathered samples, so I knew how it was going to drape, but I wanted to kind of be able to figure out, is it a cotton fabric? Because I know when I scrunch a cotton fabric up, it you'll feel all the creases in it. It creases really badly, and you need to iron it all straight. Whereas when you crease up a polycotton, it always feels quite warm in your hand. And when you open your hand, it's got minimal creases and it retains its shape. So, bearing all this new information that I've learned, I then decided to put this all into my sketchbook. So this is a sample of my sketchbook page, and you can see from the samples that I've put all the samples in. I've also written some information about the samples. I've written how it drapes. I've written where the water threads are, where the weft threads are, so that I understand the difference, which is the bias, and the fact that it felt softer. Um, uh, and the fact, and also I looked at the way that the gathers sat as well. So the difference of the gathers in the poplin, that they were quite organic, and then the difference of the gathers in the shirt fabric, and they were quite uniform. So at this point, being week 6, this would be a sample of the work that I would be expecting to see moving on to unit 2, because I know come unit 2, you guys now have been here for quite some time now, and you've started to understand the amount of work that you're going to do. You understand the handouts, and you now understand what the handouts are asking you, and you understand the requirements of the course. So I hope that this recap was really helpful, and I'm sorry it's taken a little bit longer, but I wanted to make sure that we were quite clear on what the expectations are moving forward. So I'll see you on Monday. Bye for now.